My partner set me up for infidelity, then brought his pregnant mistress to my birthday celebration. So, I revealed his betrayal and took everything from him. It all started when I was a 30-year-old administrative assistant grappling with the loss of my mother. Losing a parent can leave you feeling profoundly isolated and hollow. As anyone who has gone through it understands, I was navigating a particularly challenging emotional landscape. Then came along Alex, a charismatic man in his early 40s who seemed to know exactly what to say to lift my spirits. Our story was quite cliché at first, which may have contributed to my feelings for him. At that moment, he embodied everything I was looking for: secure, reliable, and affectionate. We enjoyed lovely outings together, and he always treated me with the utmost respect. My father adored him from the very beginning. When I first met his family, there were some initial hurdles due to our differing cultural backgrounds, but they eventually warmed up to me. His sister Mia and I clicked right away and developed a close bond. We would chat frequently and often go shopping or grab lunch together. Mia felt like the sister I had always wished for but never had. We confided in each other about everything, and I often felt incredibly thankful for her presence in my life, thanks to my partner. Alex and I were still in the midst of our romantic phase when he unexpectedly proposed to me. He completely caught me off guard by throwing a surprise engagement celebration and inviting all our loved ones. Without a moment's hesitation, I replied, "Absolutely." I can still picture our families beaming as they gushed about how Alex and I were destined to be together. I admit that for a long time, I wholeheartedly believed it. Our wedding was flawless, and we spent 2 weeks on our honeymoon in the Caribbean. It wasn't until we returned home that reality hit us hard. Moving into his apartment proved to be a challenge because he was quite particular about his belongings and refused to let me change anything in his living room or bedroom. I tried to propose a compromise, suggesting that I gradually incorporate my style throughout the house so he could adjust to it. However, he took issue with the size of my wardrobe, arguing that no one in their right mind would need that many clothes. While I'm no fashionista, like any other woman, I had a collection of outfits that I wasn't willing to part with. He insisted that I minimize my clothing as much as possible since he didn't want me to occupy half of his closet space. Understanding his concerns, I agreed. I didn't want him to feel cramped in his own home. Instead of keeping my things in our bedroom, I opted to use the guest room as my closet. Next, he had a problem with my collection of fridge magnets. Growing up, I had a strong desire to explore the world. So, when I finally landed a job, I made it a point to save money and travel as much as I could. One of my little traditions was to collect fridge magnets from each new destination I visited and proudly display them on my fridge as mementos of my adventures. However, Alex always thought they were tacky and cheap-looking. He adamantly refused to allow any of my magnets on our refrigerator. We had numerous heated discussions about it, but he eventually suggested that we shouldn't start our marriage on shaky ground, so I reluctantly agreed to let it go. During the first 2 years of our marriage, I spent a lot of time with my family and friends. Alex, on the other hand, was more of a homebody, especially since he worked long hours and often felt drained. I enjoyed being social and going out with my friends, so I didn't mind occasionally going out on my own. Alex would suggest that I stay home, but we still made time for date nights twice a week, which I cherished. Most evenings, I preferred to spend time with him, but I also enjoyed catching up with others. Similarly, he had his own interests, like spending Sundays with his golf buddies, which I never objected to. However, during the 3rd year of our marriage, I noticed a shift in Alex's behavior. When we got married, we had both clearly stated that we didn't want children. But then Alex began expressing a desire to become a father and that he would love to have a baby with me. This took me by surprise, and I reminded him that we had both agreed not to have kids. But Alex dismissed my concerns, saying he wanted to see me with a baby bump. His comments made me feel quite uneasy. At times, he insisted on not using protection, which heightened my anxiety that he was trying to force me into motherhood. I had several conversations with him, trying to understand why he suddenly wanted to be a father when he had previously enjoyed the freedom that came with not having children. Alex insisted that once I was pregnant and could leave my job, our marriage would flourish. The thought of losing my career terrified me. I know many might disagree, but after consulting my doctor, I lost my temper and shouted at him, saying he had completely lost it and had no right to dictate what I could or couldn't wear. I pointed out that I had been married to him for 3 years and had never been unfaithful, so why was he so concerned about what other men thought? I made it clear that no reasonable person would act in such a controlling manner within a relationship. Eventually, he apologized, and since this was the first bizarre thing he had ever done, I assumed he was just going through a phase, so I let it slide. However, things only escalated from there. I began to notice that messages from my friends and family were mysteriously disappearing from my phone. For instance, if I had a conversation with my sister about meeting up, I would find no trace of our interaction a few days later. It left me utterly baffled. At first, I thought it was a glitch with my phone, so I updated it to fix any potential issues. Then, one of my friends called to invite me to a small gathering she was hosting with some close friends and asked if I was free. She mentioned she would send me the invitation soon. However, I never received anything on my phone. When she called me later to ask why I hadn't responded, I told her I hadn't received any message from her after our conversation. It wasn't until I attended her gathering that weekend that she revealed she had sent me the invitation, which I had never received. Everything felt strange and unsettling. I started to suspect that my phone had been compromised, so I decided to buy a new one. Being an emotional hoarder, I didn't want to sell my old phone in case I could fix it later. During this time, I had been discussing these odd occurrences with my husband, Alex, and he seemed just as confused as I was. However, when I got my new phone, I forgot to mention it to him. That night, I woke up feeling incredibly thirsty and got up to grab some water. As I walked into the living room, I was shocked to find my husband kneeling on the couch, holding both phones in his hands. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but once they did, I could see him scrolling through my old phone. I couldn't contain my disbelief and frustration, so I asked him loudly what on earth he was doing. He jumped, clearly startled by my sudden appearance. He began rambling about how I was clearly cheating because I had bought another phone without telling him. He went on a tirade about how he should never have trusted me. As I stood there, stunned and trying to comprehend what was happening in the middle of the night, I calmly reminded him that he was already aware of the issues I was having with my previous phone and that I had just purchased a new one that I hadn't set up yet, so he could have simply waited for me to explain the next day. I asked him again what he was doing with both of my phones in the middle of the night, and he tried to justify it by saying he was just checking to see if there were any problems with my old phone. I took my phone from his hands and discovered that he had opened my messages on the old device. A realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I realized Alex was deleting my messages, which was why I hadn't been receiving invitations from my friends and family. Meanwhile, he kept insisting that he couldn't sleep and had come out to watch TV when he stumbled upon my new phone on my bedside table and began curiously searching through it. He claimed he was also checking my old phone for any bugs that I might have missed. I looked at him blankly and asked him directly if he had been deleting my messages from my phone. Hearing this, Alex became furious and vehemently denied it, telling me it was absurd to even ask him such a thing. He insisted that he would never do something like that. Despite his denial, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was seriously wrong. I pointed out that he was clearly reading my texts in the middle of the night and had no reason to deny it. I couldn't understand why he would do that to me. I told him that because he was deleting my messages, I was unable to meet up with my friends and family. It felt like a betrayal on so many levels, and I couldn't fathom why he would sabotage my relationships with my loved ones in such a covert manner. I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eyes again. I was utterly appalled and chose to trust my instincts. I told him that he had crossed a line this time and that I needed some space. I began packing my bags, planning to stay with my mother for a while. He pleaded with me not to leave, eventually admitting that he had been deleting my texts just to spend more time with me. However, 2 days later, Mia called to tell me she had some news that I might not want to hear. When she arrived, she was visibly upset and showed me photos on her phone taken outside of Alex's house. In the images, a young blonde woman was entering our home. I didn't fully grasp the implications until Mia told me that Alex had been cheating on me. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I simply nodded as Mia continued, explaining that she had been watching this girl come and go from Alex's house for the past 2 days and feared that her brother was having an affair. My entire body trembled, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Mia tried to hug me, but I pushed her away and rushed to the bathroom. The world around me spun, and I felt a dull ache in my head. I kept thinking that this couldn't be true and that perhaps there was a simpler explanation. When I emerged from the restroom, Mia wore a frightened expression. My mother, who had been informed by Mia about what my husband had done, looked at me with fury. I attempted to brush it off, insisting that it was probably just a housekeeper or one of Alex's colleagues. But the more I tried to rationalize why a young woman would be visiting my husband while we were having issues, the more I noticed Mia and my mother staring at me with pitying expressions that made me feel nauseated. My mother gently sat me down, but I just stared at the floor. Mia expressed her desire to believe her brother wasn't cheating, but the evidence suggested otherwise. She then asked if Alex had contacted me in the last 2 days, and I shook my head. The silence that followed was deafening, and I burst into tears. I can't begin to describe the devastation that washes over you when you realize your marriage is crumbling. Mia and my mother sat beside me on the floor, comforting me in their own ways. As I began to regain my composure, my mother apologized for believing my cowardly husband could ever change and offered to help me find a divorce attorney. Mia agreed and said she would dig deeper into this mystery woman, which could aid me in my divorce from Alex. I didn't do much more than nod. All I wanted was to sleep, so they left me to crawl into bed and pretend everything was just a bad dream. However, like anyone who has been betrayed, I woke up with a heavy ache in my chest. The realization slowly dawned on me that the love of my life had been unfaithful. Mia had sent me the photos of the woman entering our home, and I zoomed in as much as I could to see how young she looked. I couldn't believe that my miserable husband, instead of talking to me like a normal person, had chosen to hook up with a random individual, which only fueled my anger. If Alex thought he could do whatever he wanted and that I would simply crawl back to him, he was in for a rude awakening. I was going to file for divorce and take everything he had ever owned. I spoke with my mother, and we began researching reputable divorce lawyers in the area so we could schedule consultations. Mia called me whenever she could to check on me. When I finally hired a divorce attorney, the first thing he told me was that we needed to hire a private investigator to gather as much evidence as possible to ensure I received the best outcome in the divorce. Hiring a private investigator was costly, but I didn't care as long as Alex learned his lesson and never tried to mess with me again. During this time, Alex only messaged me twice, both times asking if I was ready to apologize to him. The messages only fueled my anger. There were so many things I wanted to say, but I knew that expressing them would alert him to the divorce, and I wanted to see his reaction when I handed him the papers. Alex never bothered to come to my mother's house because, in his mind, he still believed that his reaction to my phones was completely justified. Meanwhile, my lawyer informed me that the private investigator was gathering substantial evidence, and Alex's relationship with this young woman seemed serious since they met up almost every day. This led us to suspect that she wasn't just a random fling and that they had been involved for quite some time. Mia also discovered, after hours of online research, that this young woman was named Georgina and was only 23 years old. The most alarming detail was that she had a criminal record and was wanted in another state for involvement in auto theft as a minor while working for a gang. This meant that my husband had been having an affair with a potential criminal, which was incredibly distressing to learn. Georgina had recently worked as a stripper, so she likely lied to everyone about her past. Mia and I discussed this, and we both agreed that this was serious information that Alex needed to know. When the doorbell rang, Alex rushed to open it. To everyone's shock, he stepped inside holding Georgina's hand, who was dressed in a revealing, sparkly dress and high heels. Alex completely ignored me and approached his parents, introducing Georgina and explaining that he had been wanting to reveal something for a long time and thought this was the perfect opportunity. He then began to shout loudly that no one knew, but he was unhappy in his marriage with me because I emotionally mistreated him and never considered his feelings. He accused me of gaslighting him, manipulating him, and failing to be a good wife. He went on to claim that he had recently discovered I had cheated on him when he saw me using another phone, and that after confronting me about it, I had walked out on him. He paused for dramatic effect and continued, saying that if it hadn't been for Georgina, he wouldn't have survived the last months of our crumbling marriage. He explained how he met her 6 months ago and how one thing led to another, making him realize how poorly I had treated him. He then announced that since I left, he and Georgina had been spending more time together and had recently discovered that she was 2 months pregnant. My eyes widened in disbelief. This was new information I was not prepared to absorb. I turned to look at Mia, and her mouth hung open in shock as well. Alex continued to berate me, claiming I had failed as a wife throughout our marriage. However, he felt fortunate to have found Georgina and hoped his parents would embrace her. My mother, who had clearly been struggling to contain her rage up until that moment, suddenly lost control. She jumped out of her chair and threw an entire glass of Sprite in Alex's face, yelling that he was a piece of garbage. Georgina looked horrified, while Alex appeared stunned. Mia then screamed at Alex, telling him that his charade was over and that everyone knew he was having an affair with this woman. She went on to share everything she had learned about Georgina, including the fact that she was wanted in another state for auto theft. I can't express how satisfying it was to see my husband lose all color in his face, fear etched across his features. I realized then that this was the perfect moment to serve him with the divorce papers. I grabbed the documents from my coat and walked across the room, handing them to him. I told him triumphantly that I was done. Now that he had publicly admitted to having an affair, I was coming for everything he owned. My mother and I excused ourselves as we watched his parents and Mia continue to scold him. I was finished with him and his drama, and I had no intention of staying any longer. During the car ride home, my mother told me how proud she was to have raised a strong woman like me. I'm not sure what Mia and his parents said to Alex, but it must have been harsh because he kept calling and texting me, wanting to talk. I woke up the next morning to nearly 80 messages from Alex begging me to return to him and promising that he would change. He claimed he was willing to go to couples counseling and that if I truly loved him, I wouldn't give up so quickly. Typically, I wouldn't think twice, but if you had asked me last year if I would ever consider divorcing Alex, I would have said no. However, things have changed, and I am confident I am on the right path now. While my mind knows the right thing to do, my heart aches for him, especially after reading his emotional messages about how he can't live without me and how he has always wanted to grow old with me. I don't trust my heart. So, Reddit, am I the villain for revealing my husband's double life to his family and ultimately divorcing him? Update 1*. Wow. When I shared this, I didn't expect so many people to be negative. I've received hundreds of direct messages criticizing me for even considering forgiving this awful man. I get it, everyone. I will not go back to Alex. I want you all to stop being so harsh on me. When I posted this, I admit I was feeling vulnerable. So, I may have overreacted. However, all that guilt is gone, and I will never let my husband's foolish words sway me again. Also, to those who suggest I should just block him, I can't because my lawyer has advised me to keep all lines of communication open until the divorce is finalized. Many of you have pointed out that Alex is still lying and that he must have been involved with Georgina or another woman long before this, which is why he became so controlling and possessive in our relationship. I completely agree with that. However, I have no interest in uncovering the truth because, regardless, I just want this chapter of my life to be over. Update 2*. It has been several months since my last update.